Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Patch Breakdown, and hello, my name is Pojo. We are going to be talking about a really wild change to the Throne format. There have been a series of nerfs to Throne cards, mostly Throne staples, in fact, including Torch, Aurelian Merchant, Desecrate, and I believe one other, Heart of the Vault. So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening right now. So let's talk a little bit about these changes and what all they mean. First things first, I would say that I'm generally quite in favor of these changes. Like, there's some pretty wild stuff happening in Throne right now. It's been a lot of practice-y type stuff. Like, Throne is just a format that is very large, which has a lot of cards in it. There are a lot of like really good staple cards from various sets that have been released. Since we are going through like not a rotation format like Expedition, Throne is just all of the cards in a big pile. That means that in order to keep it balanced and keep it so that you are actually seeing like a decent set of decks, some pretty serious curating has to be done to like make sure that those cards are actually going to be in a pretty good spot. And one of the things that you can do that is really interesting, you can't do this in like an MTG type space, is you can nerf cards that are just staples for the set. Like Torch was a set 1 staple, and it was a staple from all the way through set 1 to Flame of Zolta, and it has been just kind of one of the most well-known cards in the game. The common joke is that any unit that has 3 health is no good because it dies to Torch. The card was a fast spell and is now a spell, which means that you cannot play it during other people's spells in response to Vara the Fate Touched or Vara Vengeance Seeker. You cannot play it against anything that's attacking you. You can't play it on end steps. You can only play it on your own turn and use it to kill things. It's still very good on rate. You've got the 1 cost to deal 3 damage. That's probably going to be enough of a reason to play the card in most fire decks anyways, but it will significantly decrease the utility of the card due to the fact that the card now doesn't really function if you are playing it, in spaces where it is going to counter a trick. So it's not as good as Finest Hour, for example. There's a lot of different things that can be done at fast spell speed that are just going to be a lot more exciting. And yeah, it's just an interesting thing that has changed up. And a lot of decks may switch to other types of cards to do that sort of 3 damage at fast spell speed. You can use Conflagrate, you can use Kairos' Choice, you can use Char, which deals 2 damage less but costs 1 to play, so a little bit more flexible on that front. And also, Char, I believe, still hits sights, so that's a possibility as well. Yeah, this card is really strong, and is still really strong, I would say, but is definitely not anywhere near as strong as it used to be due to the nerf to its general options. This opens up a wide variety of new strategies. There are a lot of more aggressive decks that are going to be pretty happy to see Torch gone. If Skycrag was still around, it would be pretty happy to see Torch gone, because while Skycrag can play torches at fast spell speed, they're actually more concerned about actually getting their stuff torched at fast spell speed, and an existing Champion of Fury without the ability to torch it would have been a pretty rough space to be in. So this is definitely continuing a chain of nerfs and buffs that we have seen in the basic last couple of weeks or so. There haven't been that many changes to Throne of late, and I would say that has been a pretty big issue. The meta has stagnated somewhat, but now we are actually seeing a pretty sincere effort to curate Throne and make it a more interesting place. I think that this is a really interesting start, because once you take away Torch, it's the Wild West. There is any number of interesting things that could happen. I had someone play Hero Ica against me just in a couple games ago. I've seen a lot of interesting aggressive stuff. Certainly there's some Combre and Elysian Maul still floating around. A lot of decent aggressive decks that are pretty happy to see Torch gone, but also Praxis kind of has to change up its strategies. There's a lot of interesting aggression happening there. That opens up spaces for new decks in a variety of places. It's pretty interesting. I will certainly miss Torch. It is definitely it's a staple card in the format for a wide variety of reasons. But yeah, that is a crazy change. And I think that overall, the extent of impact that this has on the meta cannot be understated, and also cannot be effectively predicted. There's a lot of different things that can happen as a result of Torch changing up. And I think that Throne is going to get really interesting over the next couple of weeks, which is going to be pretty exciting because I believe we've got a Throne ECQ coming up pretty soonish, or maybe that was a little while ago. I'm not actually sure. Either way, like crazy stuff. No, I believe it actually is coming up like possibly this month even. There's some wild things happening. Yeah, so it's going to be pretty nuts. That is the major word on it. We have some other nerfs as well. Almost everything today that has been addressed is in Praxis, but we do have a nerf to Desecrate too. So let's talk about the Praxis cards first. Aurelian Merchant is the next one to go down. This is definitely one of my favorite cards. I really liked it as a 1/4. I really liked it as a 0/4. It was bonkers in both of those situations because it's a solid ramp option that you can play while also picking out whatever card you need to deal with basically anything that your opponents can deal with. This card's stonewalled in a lot of different useful ways. The nerf to it coincides with the nerf to costs in terms of like just nerfing 3-cost 0/4s that get you up into like that sort of big space. I think that this one is a much more devastating hit to Praxis in general, and also like it's very unusual that this card now dies to Conflagrate. There's a lot of like interesting options available to kill it now. It doesn't trade with a lot of like standard Stonescar stuff, Teacher of Humility, Argenport Instigator, like Champion of Chaos, and all the stuff that was like 3/3s that basically like when they were not able to attack in with Overwhelm and Deadly. If there's yeah, it dies to Hailstorm. It just dies to a wide variety of things now, which means that it's very vulnerable while also giving you, like, you know, it's basically a lot of risk to get extra maximum power to play into bigger cards. And, like, Aurelian Merchant was really good at being very consistent. Basically, Aurelian Merchant always has the ability to pick out, like, 5 drops, where other merchants would have to pick out 4 drops, and that was something that, like, you really had to pay attention to, was the fact that it could fetch a card that was a lot more powerful than the rest of your deck, and then you could, like, just play that card down and be perfectly happy with it because Merchant would almost always support it. That was a pretty big deal. I think that this card was probably the most powerful of the standard merchants, and like its overall position in Praxis is certainly not to be denied. I certainly don't love seeing it go because it is a favorite of mine, but like as far as its nerf is, whether or not its nerf is justified, I would say sure, absolutely. So yeah, this one is probably the biggest hit to time and Praxis that we have seen so far. Even the nerf to Heart of the Vault that is coming out next, that we are going to be talking about, is not so big a hit as the hit to Aurelian Merchant. Just consistent ramp is a really big thing, and like right now there's still 2 different brands of it. You can go from 2 to 4, or you can go from 3 to 5, and like sometimes those ramp things coincide and sometimes they don't. I still have decks that like basically don't really run Merchant or Takos and are perfectly good at ramping into like big stuff in Praxis. Like this is not the end of Kairos, it's not the end of the Heart of the Vault, but it is certainly something that makes the entire deck a lot less consistent and means that it may see a lot less play in like tournament setups, as well as in like a lot of other available options. Like if you're running Temporal Distortion type stuff, like the big giant control decks, you're not going to be so happy to see a Merchant that while ramping you is just really easy to kill and doesn't give you a lot of good defense. Like this is like pretty low rate and low value for basically just guaranteed ramp. Now you kind of really have to play Aurelian Merchant for the ramp, and that's going to be very interesting. It still weighs out pretty well against East Annex Smuggler was the one I was thinking of, and Pearl Abbey Smuggler. Like both of those cards are pretty below rate in comparison to even Merchant. Like Merchant just has like a lot of health on it, and that means that it's hard to kill. And like the charge on the other Smuggler and Pearl Abbey's ability to get bigger with spells, Great Valleys with the 2/2 body that is only like go to 4/4s. There's still positions where Merchant is better off on defense than a lot of those other time Merchants. So there is some potential that this card sees play just for its like position in that slot, and also because it is a reliable Merchant that produces cards that you want when you want them, and allows you to get into like World Bearer and a bunch of other ridiculous nonsense very quickly. Yeah. So rest in peace, Aurelian Merchant. I don't know what all this is going to open up, but it is definitely a hit to Praxis, and I would say that that is like the biggest thing in terms of what all happens. The big worry I would say with this patch is looking at these cards that are getting nerfed. Like we're seeing nerf to Heart, nerf to Aurelian Merchant, which is good on defense, nerf to Torch, which is good on defense. Like basically just defensive. A lot of defensive options are being taken away from Time and Fire decks, which really opens up the possibility for Stone Scar aggro, Elysian aggro, and just general, like, all sorts of aggro from different spaces, including, you know, if you want to go into like Rakano again or maybe Skycrag, there's some potential for those decks to get way stronger in ways that may not be fully predictable. Defiance was nerfed pretty recently, so there aren't really that many one-cost responses now. The Snowcrust Yeti nerf sounds like it was really warranted at this point, but there's still a lot of really aggressive 1 and 2 drops, so it seems possible that aggro could actually get into some very good shapes here, especially since they can still use torches very offensively without having to worry too much about like the consistency of that setup. But also, like Vara Vengeance Seeker no longer gets torched, which means that she's up to almost her full strength again. Not being a 5/6 is still a big deal, but it's not as big a deal when she can't be torched during the point where your opponent is allowed to sacrifice a creature. There used to be a window there where you could torch Vara, and that was something that really like damaged the card's ability to function. So shadow control and other controlling options may actually see some benefits from the torch nerf and the nerfs to Praxis defense. And also Praxis was crushing a lot of those mid-range decks too, because it just went over all of them. So it's possible that we'll see those decks back as well. It's really going to be like, this is too much of a change, I would say, to adequately predict, but those are some things that can definitely happen as a result. Heart of the Vault went from a 6-cost 6/6 to a 7-cost 7/7. I like this change a lot. Heart of the Vault was always a card where it was harder to assemble the influence for the card than it was to play the card. Like, you could very frequently ramp the card out very easily. Trailmaker would get you the influence that you needed, or you would have Aurelian Merchant or something along those lines. So Heart was frequently coming out on turn 4, turn 5, and all that you really needed to do was play the Praxis Insignias, play the Seats, and everything like that. When you didn't have the influence, it kind of sucked because it would be frequently on your top of your deck, but it was still, like, they said that this is frequently one of the most powerful cards in the format in the patch notes. I believe them on that. That card is this card is a ridiculous beater that also kills something on your opponent's board, draws you a card, cost reduces the card so that the card can frequently just like completely just destroy your opponent. Like, you can roll them with Kairos, you can get 0-cost torches, you can get 0-cost counterspells. I've seen basically every different type of cost reduction thing just completely roll me in like a wide variety of different places. I have made great use of this card for popping Aegises, for doing all sorts of interesting things. This seems very on par with the sort of predatory Carnosaur nerf that we saw earlier, where the card was a 6-cost 6/6, got nerfed to a 7-cost 7/7, the result of which is that you trade a lot better with a lot of mid-range stuff, but you no longer have the ability to control aggro and to control the board as reliably as you used to. It also means that you're going to be playing Heart of the Vault like a little bit more frequently on the turn that you want to play it. Like, I would say that, like, if this card costs 7 and is a 7/7, you're going to have the influence for it more often, while your ramp is actually going to get you to Heart of the Vault, and you're not going to be as worried about collecting the influence for it. That's like a minor note. Like, it doesn't actually it doesn't improve the strength of the card, but I feel like it makes the card feel a little better in some ways because you're able to access that influence a little bit easier when the card costs a little bit more. Just takes a little longer to get to it, and then when you do get to it, it still pays off. Playing with this card so far, I felt like it's been pretty good. Like, certainly hasn't felt like anything too bad has happened to it. It's still an incredibly powerful card that should be run in Praxis. 7 cost is not out of reach for most of the ramp-based decks, and there's still plenty of different ways to ramp up to the card. So yeah, this is not the end of Heart of the Vault by any means, but it does mean that you have to look for alternatives in the 6-drop slot, of which there are plenty, and like, you have to get into some other different strategies than just playing like good mid-range with good value. It means you have to focus your Praxis deck a little bit more. We've been playing with some focused Praxis aggro stuff that still has like 1 to 2 Heart of the Vaults at the top. That's been pretty good. Overall, like, cards still seems very solid, but yeah, it is definitely a nerf to Praxis, and Praxis was still the dominant deck in the meta. So overall, interesting change. I actually really like the 7/7 Heart of the Vault. There's something a little bit like it had all those nice 6s. Now it has all those nice 7s, but there's something very satisfying about 7s, I think, that kind of works out. It doesn't have 6. It does have 6 influence and doesn't have like, so there's a little bit of a 6 missing, but overall, like the math still works out in some pretty fun ways, and I like the fact that it's bigger than any other 6-drop now. So that's kind of interesting. Could be really fun in a couple of other ways. Like, it definitely does trade with anything that's like a little bit bigger, and 3 7s is just kind of a fun and satisfying thing. So it's interesting, but yeah, like certainly not as strong in a ranked environment. All right, last change, Desecrate. Kill a unit, you take 3 damage. Was a 2-cost slow spell, now a 3-cost fast spell. Don't love that it went up to fast spell, because I am really just not fond of this card. But it is, of course, a card that allows you to kill any unit while only taking 3 damage in response. The patch notes note that there was not a lot of good like counterplay on this, and I would agree with that. The card has a serious drawback, but the drawback is not something that you can easily punish when they are killing your units. You just basically get to pay yourself back with Vara or other lifesteal units. Carvet Solar Dragon exists, so like that's a pretty common lifesteal card now. You've got Vara Vengeance Seeker, you have like a decent amount of other lifesteal options, and frequently you can just get away with playing aggro, playing Desecrate, and being completely happy with it. It also was a staple in even decks, and I'm honestly just smiling at all the even cards getting nerfed to odd, though I think that even-handed Golem should probably get a look taken at it. I think I was asked recently about like the 5 most hated cards that I had, and even-handed Golem actually does make the list, although I think I said something about Kodash Sees All in draft instead, so but yeah, like that is a throw-in card that, like, you know, it's fine that it doesn't have like Desecrate. Anyways, so Desecrate is pretty wild, and like I would say that as a fast spell it's pretty interesting. You are now playing it in sort of a control-based environment where you have like a little bit more of a defensive option going on, and you are playing it for like the consistency of the removal at a fairly minimal cost. Like, this is something that is no longer good in like an aggressive type format, or it's fine in an aggressive type format, but in an aggressive type format you can just use Slay, you can just use like other cards like Devouring Shadow to like sort of mess up things. I would say there are some situations where you're going to use Desecrate in aggro decks, but for the most part this is actually like getting a little bit more sat back into control and into situations where you might want to use it to basically just remove things that are particularly troublesome to you while accepting the cost, you know, the standard way that Desecrate works. Being a fast spell kill is still pretty interesting. This card is a little bit better than Death Strike, and like Death Strike was an interesting card for a pretty long time. There's not that much fast spell removal that is this consistent, and it's still kind of interesting. But like, I would say that overall it's pretty likely to only belong in control decks, which are gonna be pretty happy to have it. Like, they want the consistency, they are happy to pay the price, and they're probably pretty like comfy with the fact that it is a fast spell over a slow spell, so they might actually really like this deck anyways. But yeah, this seems like a very consistent option that you can play on top of Annihilate still. I don't think it's a major nerf to the card, but I do think that it really means that you can't quite go quite as insane in Stone Scar aggro, in like any sort of like really aggressive shadow deck. It's just a little bit harder to get this card out at a good rate, and instead it is mostly the card advantage and the consistency as a removal that is what makes it interesting. So more firmly in control, possibly in mid-range, but probably not an aggro card anymore unless you're really looking for something to solve a particular problem. I think at this point you go to Suffocates, you go to Annihilates, you go to, you know, all of the like edicts and things like that before you go to Desecrate. This card is much lower on that list, though still higher than Feeding Time, Death Strike, Avagraft, for the extremely expensive cost that it has to aggro. So yeah, this is really interesting. I certainly don't hate the fact that it got nerfed. I'm worried about it as a fast spell, but I would say that, like, by and large, this is definitely a nerf to the card in general, so there's not too much to worry about. Like, it is certainly strong, and it's certainly going to be in a lot of annoying decks still, But like overall, like this is probably still going to be like a staple control card, and the fact that aggro decks can't use it is probably not going to be too much of an issue because they've still got plenty of strong removal to line up. Like I remember Life with Stonescar aggro pre-Desecrate, and it was very similar to Life with Stonescar aggro with Desecrate, but a couple less of your hybrid color cards got destroyed. So that's something to pay attention to. But overall, I think that the card's nerf is just like a small nerf to the aggro decks, which also allows for a little better survivability against like Praxis and that kind of things. We were just talking about how Stonescar aggro is one of those decks to watch out for. Desecrate is something that might actually help with that particular setup. All right, those are the 4 changes. I think that overall this seems like a pretty good start. I'm really curious about whether or not Throne can be saved. Like, so my impression is that if you have a format that is just getting larger and larger and larger and moving into like a legacy type format, it is not really possible to balance that format in a way that is going to keep it viable for competitive play. And Eternal's format has started to really feel the weight of those cards, which means that taking action like this, like killing a lot of like people's babies, I think, like really just going for like the very staple cards in terms of like, and just like actually hammering on places where there is a lot of power is an interesting change up that could really potentially allow for the format to be balanced for a little while longer. But I'm also like skeptical that in a few sets Throne is going to be all that viable a format. I think the queue will eventually need to be replaced. This at the moment seems like a pretty solid thing to be doing, and I'm really like, it may be possible with a lot of balance changes and a lot of curating to make a format like this continue to be fun and playable for a wide variety of a wide span of months and years. So like, I don't know if Throne is going to be a truly eternal format, but if you can get it to work, if you can actually balance legacy, that's a pretty impressive step to be taking. So we'll see how these changes work out. Overall, they seem like pretty good steps in the right direction. I'm very excited to see Torch nerf because, like, man, that just changes so much in terms of what all can be done and what all is like interesting and good. So yeah, we'll see how these changes play out, but overall pretty positive on the new changes. Glad to see some interesting things happening in Throne and like continuing to experiment and do really like cool live balancing in general. So this is a massive shakeup. Throne is going to be real exciting for the next couple of months. Let's see exactly how exciting as we go along. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I am on Twitch and Twitter and YouTube. You can find me on any of those places. I usually post when I am streaming or when I have a new video up on Twitter, so that's a good place to follow me. And of course, like if you have Amazon Prime, you can sub to my Twitch for free because that whole Twitch Prime thing is a thing. Beyond that, I'm also on Patreon, and all of your support really, really helps out, particularly in the December months when my hours are a little lighter and I have more time to be working on content, but less money to go around. So thank you so much for watching and have a lovely day. I hope you enjoy the new Throne changes, and I hope you have a wild time in this wild, wild west of a meta. See you next time.